Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's web conference. This is Windows 10 Community Call for December 2016. Today's session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. If you do not consent to being part of a recorded session, please disconnect at this time. Attendees may access the web conference recording via a link that will be delivered within 72 hours post-conference or at the same location you used to join today's conference. To learn more about the ways you can participate in today's event, please click the Messages button in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. We encourage you to use the Messages panel at any time to ask questions regarding content or to request support. To do so, please click the Messages button at the bottom of your screen, type your question into the white box, and click Send. Your question will appear under Comment Pending until someone responds. Your feedback is important to us. At the end of the session, we'll have a few polling questions. We would strongly recommend giving us your feedback on that. If you experience any technical difficulties during today's web conference, please press F5 to refresh your console or send a message and I'll be happy to help you resolve the issue. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Now I'd like to hand things over to your first presenter, Walt Perry. Walt, you now have the floor.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning, partners. We sincerely appreciate your time to join us today for our Windows and Devices December 2016 community call. As you know, we always hold these calls every third Thursday of the month. We know we have a lot of registrants, and it looks like we have some really decent amount of participants here. So again, really appreciate it. We know it's a crazy holiday season, so I'd like to open it up and say happy holidays to everybody, and I hope everybody's getting what they need out of the holidays with their family and friends and holiday cheer. So we have sort of a Christmas present to give you guys this year. We have a couple fantastic presenters based upon some feedback that we received from a large call recently. We have Chris, who's our App Compat Strategy a project manager, program manager. He is a senior architect specializing in cybersecurity, application compatibility, and modernizing software assets. He's affectionately known as our App Compat guy. He's been doing that for many, many, many years and has some really deep insights into him. So we're really lucky to have him on the call. We also have Mark, who's a program manager on the engineering team, the Windows engineering team, to discuss upgrade analytics. And you're asking, well, what is this upgrade analytics, Walt? And it's essentially upgrade analytics provides data-driven insights from the Windows Upgrade Analytics service to streamline and accelerate Windows upgrades for partners and customers. So that's it really in a nutshell, and Mark's going to dive into that with a couple PowerPoints, and then he's got a really cool demo. So again, we really are very lucky and fortunate to have them. What I'd like to do is quickly go again over our team. So if you're new to the call, welcome. We really appreciate that. We also have some support people on the call, which are part of my team to help us answer any questions. We have Brenda Shamman, who's our Director of Windows and Dynamics. She essentially runs our ETU, which is our enablement team units for partners. There's myself. Everybody knows and loves Steve Adams. He's known as the device guy and has been doing it for many, many years. We also have Chet Devchand, who's our peer, and he's helped put this call together, so many thanks to Chet. And of course, we have Pang. Pang is amazing. She's our partner marketing manager for Windows and Devices, focused on partners, and she really cares about our partner community and helps us get these calls together as well. So that being said, what I'm going to do is mention that, as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat window. We'll do our best to answer them. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to our team at winrecruit@microsoft.com. All these calls are being recorded, as was mentioned. So, they're posted on our community call page, and we'll provide links to Chris's blog because he has an amazing App Compat blog, and we'll also provide the PowerPoint in our Windows Team Yammer group. So all that will be there. Without further ado, I'm going to let Chris take it away here. So Chris, if you want to go ahead and just take over as presenter, I'll go ahead and go on mute, and I hope we have a fantastic presentation.
Excellent. And I did, of course, note, Walt, that your use of many, many instances of the word many in referencing how long I've done it, which I'll simply take as a euphemism for you're really old.
Yes, that might be true. And I've learned that Chris does have a wicked sense of humor, so this should be a really good discussion.
So yeah, so I'm just going to kind of kick off the conversation and really kind of portray how we think about app compat, both within how we design the product, how we market, how we work with partners, and really want to kind of center the conversation around a few core principles, right? Because this is really central to how we think about this. The first principle is we really want to make sure that we're accurately assessing and managing risk. That's the intent of what we're doing. We want to work on maximizing the deployment velocity and having effective mitigations for any failures that come along, right? So those are the principles that drive what we do. And it's important to think about risk because we're going to have to behave differently now than we have in the past. For most organizations, the last migration they did was their migration off of Windows XP. And when coming off of Windows XP, right, you would just have, on average, quite a bit more risk. To give you a sense of, kind of what some of the statistics that we're aware of at the sort of the overall what's happening worldwide in the enterprise ecosystem, we look at the average failure rate in a migration from Windows XP to Windows 7. In the end, average somewhere right around 21%. So in essence, 1 out of every 5 pieces of software I had to do something to. Now, as Mark Twain once famously said, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. So to kind of give some sense, I've had customers whose failure rate was 100%. And that wasn't because every single application needed to be completely re-engineered, started over, and just wiped and done again. Instead, in the example of the unfortunate 100% customer, they had a standard for their application packages that included a custom action. And the custom action happened to not be compatible. And so as a result, that caused every single package they have to fail. And the resolution was, well, we actually wrote some automation to go through all of the packages that they had and remove that custom action and replace it with something that was going to work. So it's just not like, 100% that needed something drastic done, but it was 100% that needed some touch. So when you have numbers on that order, it usually makes a lot of sense to have the kinds of projects that supported these migrations. Hey, let's go find everything. Let's understand what's broken about it, right? Let's see what's broken and put them all into a queue and have this process that would often last, 6 or 12, or for very, very large organizations, often 18 months. When we're dealing with the failure rate moving from Windows 7 to Windows 10 or Windows 8 to Windows 10, we're dealing with a very different set of statistics. The average failure rate that we're seeing so far moving from Windows 7 to Windows 10 is about 2%. The average failure rate moving from Windows 8 to Windows 10 is less than 1%. And it's sort of interesting the difference between the two of them, right? And what most of that we've seen is attributable to is that starting with Windows 8, we kind of went after the one remaining really big systematic problem that kept happening over and over and over again, which is not a technical failure, there's something in the design of the software that won't work, but rather it would ask, hey, what version of Windows are you? And if we told it something other than what it wanted to hear, it would just basically say, all right, you're not the one I want, so I'm just not going to run. Right? It was a hard-coded version check. It failed, didn't run. There was nothing technically wrong, potentially. We just never got past that check. So it was in Windows 8.1, actually, that we began to lie by default. So if you ask Windows 8.1, hey, what version of Windows are you? Unless you happen to have put in an application manifest saying, oh, I am aware of Windows 8.1, I'm cool, you're good, we'd lie. We'd say I'm Windows 8. And the same thing is true on Windows 10. Hey, what version of Windows are you? Oh, I'm Windows 10. And you can flash your secret card and say, yes, actually, I know about Windows 10. You can tell me the truth. It's only then that we tell you the truth. Right? So most of that 2% is actually something really easy to fix. So we're dealing with something different. I've gone literally an order of magnitude smaller, 20% to a top of 2%. And I just need to behave differently. And it turns out that most of us have a whole lot of practice and experience in behaving differently. We know what it's like to do a migration where the risk of failure is relatively low. In fact, we probably know that best because we get to practice it once a month. We call them Windows updates. We already know how to handle those, right? There's not a 0% chance of failure, but there's also not a 20% chance of failure. So this allows us to sort of look at this spectrum and say, let me pick something closer to what I'm doing every second Tuesday of the month versus something that looks a lot more like what we did when we got rid of our Windows XP, right? And that's the behavior that we want to drive. In that context, right, then we really need to start looking much more closely at, well, where does the risk lie, right? Do I have a critical risk if the application fails? Great examples of this are in healthcare, right? If I have a life support system, it's a pretty critical risk to the organization. Like, failure is a really big problem versus high versus medium versus low. But we also want to understand the actual risk to the application based on other characteristics, not just how important it is. For example, most organizations, Microsoft included, would consider an extremely high priority application to be something like Outlook. Email is really core and central to what we do. That being said, given that we run within Microsoft the latest and greatest version of Outlook, the risk that no one will have tested it, that it's not going to be compatible, is actually pretty low. So even though very central to a huge number of business processes, the risk that it could fail has already been managed up front because it's a highly tested scenario. So really thinking through and determining this taxonomy of what are my critical risk applications, not just based on importance, but also based on likelihood of failure. What's interesting going onward, sort of adjacent to this, is that we're already starting to notice a pattern around application risk for those customers who have embraced Windows 10 early and have seen a couple of iterations of Windows as a service so far. And that is that the single greatest predictor of whether or not an application is going to work on the latest release of Windows 10 is whether or not it worked on the last one, right? And this concept of software brittleness is something that we're starting to see highlighted. In the past, the timelines are too long, right? But nowadays, you can say, listen, if this one's breaking every single time, when the next one comes out, let me start with it, right? Or even better, let me look at, hey, could I do something architecturally to make it less brittle and make it less impacted by change, right? And put that in my critical app risk category because it has shown a tendency to break over and over again. So the part of this is really understanding how do we manage that. If I have an application, for example, that I'm actually doing testing on in preparation for Windows updates, it makes a lot of sense for me to put it there because that's an application risk. When we start talking about assigning application risk to it, we want to assign some numbers to this simply because what we have found is that if you don't put any criteria, any constraints, if you ask a typical organization how many of your applications are critical and need to be managed as critical risk applications, the average response will be 70% of the inventory. And I would argue that if 70% of all of the applications you have, the cost of failure was you go out of business, then you are probably in a very risky business, right? It's probably not true. So we really want to kind of manage that down to say, hey, let's invest in really understanding what my critical risk applications are, high risk, medium risk, low risk, so I can start to behave accordingly. In addition to risk, I also want to think about how I'm going to go about testing, right? And so, because testing is kind of a spectrum of how much time, how much cost I can invest in that. The most expensive sort of testing is full-on regression testing. That means I'm going to take the application, I'm going to define every single scenario that matters to them, and I'm going to test them all. And if I've got, back to the previous example, a system that is managing a, life support device, I might do that, right? Or if I am in financial services and I have a system that gates access to, wire transfers or stock market trades or something else, I may do a full regression test there because the cost is potentially catastrophic. The risk is very, very high, or the brittleness is very high. Maybe I do more. Versus smoke testing, let's kind of poke at a few things, right? I do want to understand, I want to actually load it up and run it, but I don't need to go and see everything. Sort of in the middle is where I start looking at where automation may help. And this is one thing that I would caution anyone who's looking at automated solutions, really understand the accuracy of automation for that particular scenario. It's important because it's kind of in the middle, but where it sits in terms of where I would use it depends upon efficacy. We should always be looking for the statistics that back up the decision to use it. For example, we saw a lot of these static analysis products in a Windows XP retirement that would hit an accuracy rate of on the order of 95% accuracy at the portfolio level, which if you use the Bayesian algorithm to predict individual predictive accuracy at the application level would lead to about 59% accuracy at the individual attribute level. So we got a fairly good level of confidence, right? It wasn't perfect, right? We wouldn't want to not test anything, but it let us understand the impact to the ecosystem, and it gave us really good signals around the application itself that were really predictive. So it was a really good use of testing resources. When we took the same approach and applied it to web migrations coming from IE8 to IE11, which was another recent migration a lot of folks went through, we found the accuracy was a great deal less. So we had an average accuracy rate at the portfolio level of about 30%. So if it told me I'm going to have 50 apps broken, it was typically reasonably close, sort of a 30% accuracy level. At the individual application accuracy level, we saw the accuracy of automation coming in at around 2%, right? So in essence, you're wrong 98% of the time, in which case I would be cautious in having that be my lead strategy. So for automation, the entry in the middle, really be mindful of how accurate is the automation for this problem space. And what I would say the hotspots today remain for automation. If I have a user who had historically disabled UAC, it's worth noting that UAC being disabled is not a supported scenario in Windows 10. We do literally zero testing. We have no idea what happens if you configure it that way. Generally not a good idea. If you did that for Windows 7, it's a good idea to undo that action, and automation is really helpful, the same reason it was helpful in XP retirements. If you're coming from a Windows 8.1, I've yet to see tools that have a high enough accuracy rate to make them worth it, but I'm always looking at it, right? Always, being open to it because it's a great approach that's just not perfect for everything, and that's okay. Moving further down, do I want to just pilot, right? This is sort of a, testing it out by folks by saying, hey, here's a desktop with it on it with your stuff. Use your stuff and tell us what you find. All the way to reactive, which is I'm just going to deploy it and wait for you to call me. And honestly, reactive is where most people do the majority of their testing for Windows updates already. A typical reactive testing regime for that would be day 1, deploy to my team. No one calls me complaining. Day 2, deploy to the entire floor. No one calls me complaining. Day 3, deploy to the entire building. No one complains. Next day, deploy to the entire campus. No one complains. Next day, deploy to everyone in this region, then maybe the country, then maybe the broader geography, and then the rest of the world, right? There's all kinds of different mechanisms to do that, but that's exactly what this means, right? It's, we just want to go out, have a good response mechanism, and if our response mechanism is set up so that the experience is good enough and that we've managed the high-risk stuff efficiently enough, it's not a bad way to do it. It's honestly how most people are already doing it in their personal lives, right? If you see an update to your phone operating system, you tend to just take it, and then if something goes wrong, then you start reaching out and griping about it, but you're not sitting there going, I can't believe they didn't regression test every single application in the App Store, right? They don't. They kind of take this reactive method, and as long as the user experience isn't terrible, that can be a very effective way to do it. It's one we use a lot for Office migrations as an example, simply because the quantities would never allow us to do a test every single thing. So here's kind of, we bring those two things together to start to think about how would you distribute that testing, right? If I have critical applications, that 2% that I'm providing insurance on, I may want to do all of those as regression tests. When I start getting into the high criticality, high risk applications, that I want to maybe smoke test a sampling from them. Our internal Microsoft IT department talks a lot about how we do sampling and grouping based upon similarities in the application. And, in essence, we use like a canary in a coal mine approach. Here's a group of applications, maybe it's 20 that are similar on some dimensions. We'll test maybe 2 of them. And if they both fall over, then we may test more. We may say, hey, there may be something about this grouping of applications that causes it to be brittle to this update. So let's look deeper. If both of them pass, the rest we just do either in pilot or in reactive testing. We just move right along, right? And as we kind of drill downwards, you can kind of see we just do fewer and fewer that we're doing heavy, invasive, planned touches on because the risk is dropping and dropping. And then, with this approach, it's trust but verify, right? We have the overall statistics. What are we seeing across the industry? But we want to cross that with, well, what are we seeing in my organization? Because my software might be different. So this is kind of a starting point. As I see more things fail, I move things further up the line. As I see fewer things fail, I cautiously move things further down the line until I get the balance that's helping me manage the risk without over-managing it, right? Because we certainly don't want to have, in a world of, Windows as a service, updates coming once every, 6 months, 9 months, whatever the case may be, I still cannot wedge in a 12 to 18-month process once every 6 months. I will be perpetually 3 or more versions behind leveraging that process. It's all about evolving to be even more agile. And it's this agility-based approach that looks at, how do we get some initial quick wins? How do we get some seats? This is one of the big learnings that we got from XP migrations, is that it was better to declare seats moved and show progress in terms of team morale, in terms of executive sponsorship, in terms of employee engagement, to get the quick wins, to get it in the ecosystem. Interestingly, the number one correlation that I thought was really interesting in terms of, how long the project would take, is that we noted that if we walked into a room where they're planning out their migration off of Windows XP, if the project team from the organization was in the project running the old OS, then on average, the migration would take, believe it or not, 5 months longer on average. Because they were so risk averse, they weren't even willing, as the Windows 7 or Windows 8 project team, to run it themselves, right? The more we can get those quick wins and demonstrate that, it does start to drive momentum, and then start to do some sprints as we go along, right? To sort of figure out how can we get as many seats as possible, build that momentum, build the data set. And I refer to it here as kind of the min-max approach, or in essence, how do we figure out the minimum number of applications I'm going to have to manage to deploy the maximum number of seats. We've seen that role-based, right? And I'll give an example from an airline customer that we worked with. They started with a few very dedicated, we call them structured task worker roles. They said, here's our, gate agents. Gate agents run about 10 pieces of software for this particular organization. And every single thing can be accomplished with the phone. They actually don't need the computer to get their things done. If that failed for some reason, they can, through the phone, do literally everything. It's designed that way. So they said, here's 10. That's it. When we get done, we can deploy all of them. And if anything happens to go wrong, the backup's really straightforward and easy. So they were able to deploy to every single person in that role in the organization. And then moved on to the gate reader, right, which is what scans your ticket when you're boarding on, which is like 2 pieces of software. Very, very easy, a little bit riskier, right, because the cost of failure on a gate reader is I got to collect all those tickets and manually put them in, kind of a pain, slows the boarding process, don't want to do that, right, but still not much software, another sprint. And then they could sort of move on into their call center and move to the structured task worker so that by the time they got to their information workers with the broad inventory, they were already really good at it and can start, really working the process well. On the bottom line, sort of the heavy lifting, that's what we say, is if you still have anyone who's sitting on XP, that's likely to be a heavy lifting type of activity. So we want to start that and get that in the queue as early as possible, right? And just keep iterating on how do we get more people on more quickly. And to kind of show that in a graphical way, right? Let's figure out who the group is. Let's figure out what's on there. Let's take a look at what the inventory is and just kind of move through the whole deployment plan until we get there, right? Should we test, yes or no? How should we, get things engaged to go through this sprint? And then just wash, rinse, and repeat, right? Same thing for testing, right? We're going to go through, hey, where do you live in terms of risk? Which kind of testing should you get? To then move over into remediation, right? How should I fix it? The nice thing about Windows 7 migrations or Windows 8 migrations coming from XP is that there's a whole lot of use for AppCompat shims, right? We use them a ton to get things remediated. When you have a very small risk of failure, chances are it might be a little bit harder to resolve that, right? So troubleshooting becomes more of an issue to figure out how to solve that, working to get the application natively compatible or seeing what mitigations are in place. This is very, very similar to the process that you would have used for Windows 7. What really changes is the process for landing in this workflow, right? But to kind of summarize and bring it back, it really is, we need to take a step back and rethink. We just live in a different technology world than we did, half a decade or a decade ago. Everything is moving faster to our benefit. We've got smaller bits of change coming more frequently. It's giving us access to innovation without making us wait 3 to 5 years. And that's a really huge benefit to all of us. But it does require us to rethink our process, right? And this is the process that we have seen customers embracing when they've been able to take this Agile approach and transform and get onto Windows 7 and really start driving, the much more quick adoption and deployment of technology within their organizations. So with that, I'd kind of like to turn the helm over to Mark to kind of talk about, what we've been thinking about from a tools perspective in the product itself and outside of the product and how we can support that with the tools we've been building. So Mark, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thanks, Chris. By the way, this was a great presentation. I hadn't heard your latest iteration in a while. This is great. I think this aligns really well with what we're working on from an upgrade analytics perspective. I'll give you guys a little bit of intro of where I'm coming from. I'm actually a program manager on the Windows team, and we're the team trying to ensure that compatibility with the operating system is very high. So we work on proactively testing a bunch of third-party applications that come from external ISVs. We work with ISVs on issues that they find because they are really the only ones that can do this regression testing on their applications, as Chris mentioned before. And also, we're the people that are getting yelled at whenever something breaks, and we help fix it from that perspective. So we're a team of about 70 to 80 professional compatibility nerds that do nothing but compatibility. And me specifically, I work on a sub-team that's focused on how do you make compatibility happen for enterprise customers. And as Chris said, we as a company have a pretty good idea on how we make it happen from a process perspective through having feet on the ground with our own consultants, the MCS org, which Chris is a part of. And in the past we had a set of tools that didn't necessarily align really well with what was needed in these field engagements. So now with Windows 10 and potentially a quicker cadence of going through upgrades when you're going to Windows as a service, we said we need to revise our tool set and make sure it aligns really well with what we need in our projects. Let's see. There we go. So we built Upgrade Analytics. This is the one-page marketing slide here, which allows the enterprise IT to quickly identify and focus on the critical issues impeding upgrades, provides data-driven insights to plan and manage the upgrade process end-to-end. A lot to take in. Essentially, what we're saying is we're building a tool that helps you do what Chris just suggested. And we're doing it, through workflow rather than through giving you big tables with application inventories. We want to give you insights and we want to make recommendations about applications, drivers, and computers. We want to support you when you're doing a risk-based approach, and we'll give you all the guidance and all the things that we have learned. With that, I'll jump over to a demo because I think it's good to let the tool speak for itself. So I'll start presenting my desktop here. And then Chris, if you could give me a quick shout here whenever this comes through.
Yep, you are showing up live.
Okay, perfect. So what you're looking at here is upgrade analytics. And the way we chose to implement it from front-end perspective is we're using the OMS log analytics, Operations Management Suite log analytics, to actually show you the insights that we're generating. And we're using telemetry data that's coming from client machines in order to generate these insights. What you see here is our demo workspace. This tile here represents upgrade analytics. We have a couple of versions of this tile, and I will use a pre-release tile here to show you a couple of new features that we haven't shipped publicly yet. We're about to ship those. I think this will work really well for a demo. So what you see here is, as promised, instead of giving you a large list of this is the applications that we found and this is the install count, we actually created this workflow where we're saying, okay, this is how you go through your project, or how your customers can go through the project to get the quickest migration possible. So we start with a little overview here, and we see in this specific workspace we have 15,000 computers. We have a total of 59,000 applications. That's a lot. This is just to let you know if your deployment of our telemetry was successful and if you're getting all the data that you need. Then, as Chris said, the first thing you really want to think about is what is the criticality of your apps, or the importance of your apps. You want to go through and say, okay, the following apps are the ones that are absolutely critical for my business. There's a certain set of applications that are important, but maybe I don't get out of business if I don't look at them right now. There's a certain set of applications that you support on a best effort level. And so the first step is to go through the inventory and identify these important apps. And what we do for you here is, nobody wants to go through an inventory of 59,000 applications. Turns out, if you look at this inventory, 57.3 thousand actually are installed on less than 2% of your fleet. So on your behalf, we mark them as maybe not that important. For everything else, you have a chance to go through and do your review here. This may not project super well. There's a lot of information on a relatively small screen here. But just so you get the idea, right? We have an application name, vendor, version. We know how many machines this is installed on. We actually also know how often this app gets used. This column here is called monthly active devices. A monthly active device is an app, is a device that has been running this app at least once in the last 30 days. So you can see this Visual C++ redistributable is a little bit of an edge case because you typically don't call that directly. But if you look at this Forefront Identity Manager add-in here, you see it's installed on 4,000 machines. 450 machines are actually running this at least once a month. So it's a good indication that something is actually used. And our tooling here gives you the opportunity to go through and say, okay, this is an application that is important for me, for example. I'll go ahead and save that. Going back here, next step would be to really look at your applications and also drivers and see what you want to do with them. And we do give you a bunch of information here about these applications. So the first thing we do is we point out all the apps that we have known issues for. We have our large team, we do a lot of testing, a lot of ISV communications, and whenever we hear about an issue, we put it in a database on the system called the SDB to shim database, or externally facing, we call it the compatibility database. So within all your applications, you can take a look here and see what needs attention. Let's just take a look at the ones that are not reviewed yet. So we see, oh, there's a very driver-y piece of software or a device software called DisplayLink software, and oh, it turns out this application is removed due to compatibility issues during the upgrade, if you were to do an in-place upgrade. But there's nothing further required because we get you a new version of that software automatically through Windows Update. So if you find something else here, I think Vantage Access Connections is also removed. Interesting to know. Let's see if we find a different example. Oh, here, this is interesting. McAfee DLP endpoint you actually need to remove before you upgrade to a new operating system. The app may or may not work, we don't know. We just know if it's there and you start an upgrade, it's not going to work. So this is the kind of information that we give you. And the option that you then have is you can go through and say, okay, I read about this, this is okay. I'll set an upgrade decision for this application. I say this is ready to go because I've put a mitigation in place, for example. Going back, the next bucket of apps you want to look at is all the applications that you have marked as I somehow care about them, either as business critical or as important. And you want to go through and see what you want to do with those. And this is really where Chris is saying where you want to decide whether you want to do a proactive versus reactive testing approach. Let's pull this up as a table. And we give you some data to decide whether you want to do this or not. Maybe let's go back to a list view here. Let's scroll down a little bit and show you an example. Somebody did a good job and already rationalized this here. Second, please. So these are all our applications where we said they are somehow they need to be looked at. And as Chris mentioned, if something has already been run by other people or by Microsoft, something very common like the Silverlight SDK, that's actually a pretty good indicator of this app working. So what you see here is we give you guidance and we say we've seen this application installed on at least 100,000 commercial Windows 10 devices, and we put this ready for Windows status here that says this app is highly adopted. So this is potentially a good candidate to not do a full regression testing or even a smoke testing on. Maybe you want to move this app to this reactive testing bucket because we already tell you other people have taken care of this. Similar thing for the C++ redistributable here, or the WCF, Rich Internet Application Services. So this is an insight that we pull out of the telemetry. We just take a look on all the commercial telemetry that we're getting, and we're aggregating this up so it's not identifiable to a specific company. And we're saying, hey, this is an insight that we can provide. Okay. Going back here, so we have looked at applications that have known issues. We have looked at applications that do not have known issues but that are important to you. We can also take a look at drivers, and that's especially interesting in the in-place upgrade scenario where you want to make sure that if you in-place upgrade a machine from one OS to another, you get a driver experience that works. And we give you a similar set of insights here as well. So another thing that Chris really talked about is this idea of min-max. How with the minimum amount of upfront testing can I get the highest number of deployments? And this is a new feature here. We call it Prioritize App and Driver Testing, which we're super proud of. And it hasn't released yet. It will probably release within the next 2 or 3 weeks after the holidays, where we actually take this min-max approach and tell you what is the most low-hanging fruit in order to unblock machines. The algorithm behind this has been developed by Microsoft Research, and the idea is to actually sort issues so that they unblock the highest number of machines possible. And we've used this exact same approach to rationalize the Windows 7 consumer ecosystem when we did the Windows 7 to Windows 10 free upgrades. So I'll go in here real quick and show you what I mean with this. What we're getting you here is what we call a proposed action plan, where we say, okay, this is how we would say you should approach this stuff. We do rank all of the items, be it applications or drivers. We'll give you the name, vendor, version with it. And this is where it gets interesting. So item number 1 here, debugging tools. If you were to make an upgrade decision on this app of ready to upgrade, and this implies that you've either regression tested it or smoke tested it, or you said, okay, this is an app that's okay to just pilot and I'll react to potential issues. So if you set this upgrade decision of ready to upgrade, then immediately 357 computers, or about 4% here of your entire population, will be ready to upgrade because you have reviewed every single item on them. If you test the debugging tools in the Xerox print, you get up to 571 machines, or 6.36%. If you have a goal and you say, hey, I want 20% of my fleet to upgrade until next week, then I can tell you it's the first 11 items here that you would need to set ready to upgrade, and at that point in time you would have 20.99% of your machines ready to go. So this is, the min-max approach that Chris was talking about. And this is actually a lot more complicated than just putting stuff in the order of install counts. It's also a lot more valuable. The important thing to understand is, as soon as you remove a couple apps from this list, so let's say you remove app number 15 today, that would recalculate this entire report the next day, and we would give you a new ideal order of how to go through, because you can imagine that by unblocking one app, the entire picture may change a little bit. So that's min-max in here. As a final step then, we'll give you this view here of how many machines are now ready to go, how many machines are unblocked to upgrade. And you get to actually also segment these insights by what we call computer groups. In computer groups, you can pull out of SCCM in the form of collections, or you can define computer groups directly in Upgrade Analytics. If you say, hey, I want to look at all the Surface devices, for example, that could be a computer group, or all the Dell computers. We're also starting to look at Office add-ins. What we give you is an inventory. We understand that people are concerned about Office add-ins in general. And we also give you information about IE websites. We use the site discovery feature, and we pull that into Upgrade Analytics as well. So you can reason over these types of different applications in Upgrade Analytics. I'm going to switch back to the deck here.
Mark, this is Walt. I'm getting the deck back up and running.
Okay.
There you go. And you did mention that this is free, right?
I'll get to that, but yes, this is a free solution.
Okay, cool.
Stealing my thunder here.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. All right. Just quickly here, we have a couple people that have looked at this Upgrade Analytics, and they tend to like it. So the Gartner guys were here on campus, and they liked the solution. They said it's great to get actionable insights out of telemetry. We have the Daimler guys, the car builders, Mercedes-Benz, already using this in the United States, and they say this is great. We have Ryder as well, and they are using it for their endpoint upgrade too. We're working on expanding this in the future. Today we have this left part here, which is upgrade analytics. We're building more solutions. One of them is called update analytics or update compliance, which is all about, do you have the right Windows updates on your systems and what are you missing there? And then once that is out, we'll actually build yet another tool that we call health analytics, which will look into your OS health, performance, crashes, reliability, these kinds of things. I think this is an interesting slide from a partner perspective, right? How do you think about this as a partner or as an SI? So, I showed you what the customer story looks like for upgrade analytics, and I think that's valuable for everybody who is involved with one specific upgrade project. So that could be one of your employees on customer side running the project, and they will hopefully be more effective using upgrade analytics. Well, there's, and this is pretty much number one here in this value prop, where we say you as an SI can use upgrade analytics, and I'll get to it in a second. Upgrade analytics is a free solution, so there's no money you need to pay us to use it in your customer engagements. The second thing, though, is we're actually also working on giving you as a system integrator a view over all of your client environments. So if you have, 5 upgrade projects in flight at the same time, maybe you want to pull aggregate data out of these. And OMS already supports connecting these OMS workspaces to Power BI, so you could actually aggregate this kind of data already and get your own insights. And in the future, we'll work with SIs to make these capabilities even more powerful, and we're definitely looking for feedback on what you would be looking for. The idea then would be that what you've potentially learned from one customer project, you could share in other customer projects that you're conducting as well. And obviously, it would be in your hands to negotiate with your customers on how you make that happen from a data sharing agreement perspective. But from a technology perspective, this is possible. And then, the common questions in getting started: how much is the service? It is free. The way we're doing it is the following. OMS, the Operations Management Suite, which is our front-end service, typically charges by the amount of data ingested or the amount of nodes managed. Our model would be by the amount of data ingested, but we actually opt that out from billing, and the Windows team is actually funding the data that gets sent. So for you, if you want to use Upgrade Analytics, it is completely free. There's no cost for our Upgrade Analytics backend services, and there's no cost that would be billed to your OMS or Azure account either. We opt all of that out from billing. People often ask, what's the impact on my client machines? And we say it's very low because this inventory component that we're using is built into the operating system. And a full sync of data that we send to the service is less than 2 megabytes, and you as an admin get to control how much gets synced. We retain data for a while. So we generate what we call a daily snapshot of data, and you can go back for up to 7 days. Your machines stay in the tool for up to 90 days after they have sent their telemetry. And then we do have anonymized data like this Ready for Windows that I was showing you, which gets stored in aggregated format indefinitely. But all your customer data is logically separated. I put 2 links down here. aka.ms/upgrade analytics signup is our marketing and signup page. You can use that to get going with it. And aka.ms/upgrade analytics is our blog, which is the place to stay informed about new features that we're shipping and things that we're thinking about. Also a good way to get in touch with us. So I'd recommend follow that if you're interested in the tool. And you can actually also send us an email to uasupport@microsoft.com. You'll get directly to the PM team, and we'll answer your questions. So now I'll start reading through the questions here. There was a question from Daryl, and that was around a demo site that's publicly available because you need a good number of machines to show off the capabilities. We're working on that right now. we do have an internal event coming up called Tech Ready in February, for which we want to create a hands-on lab type of content so people can play with it. For this lab, we need to pull a sample data set. So I'm actually going to be working on pulling a sample data set similar to what you just saw this week or next week, and then we'll figure out how to make this available as a demo for partners, for example, and we'll announce that on the blog. And then there was another question from Todd here. The question is, what agent is required on the machines to be inventoried? The quote-unquote agent, which is not really an agent but an OS component, we call the Microsoft Compatibility Appraiser. A previous version of that we've actually already shipped with Windows 7. It was just called Program Inventory. And the way to get that on the machine is through a regular Windows update. So if you have customers that are already taking all the recommended updates, they will have that, that agent on their boxes already. Otherwise, it's as simple as installing a Windows update. I don't like to call it an agent. I really like to call it an OS component because, well, whenever you hear agent, there's this assumption that it will actually bog down your machines and make them slower. For this agent, you've actually already paid by installing your operating system. We've always had an inventory component, and we do not impact performance beyond the regular Windows baseline. So, putting this agent on doesn't really have an effect on how your Windows 7 system would run. There's another question from Darrow. We get questions about telemetry from our EPG clients when being in the upgrade analytics discussion. Would love if there was one sheet that could give them that explains the telemetry level and what information is shared. This would help us with objection handling. Understood. On our blog and in our TechNet documentation, we do already have a complete list of the telemetry fields that get sent from Win 7 and 8.1 for upgrade analytics. Similar complete lists are getting generated for Windows 10 as well for the different telemetry levels. I understand we probably want a nicer one-pager about that, and we can work on that. I'm going to take Amir's question here first. The question is there training for this? Right now, if you look on YouTube, we have a couple of presentation sessions. As we speak, until the end of the year, we'll have a click-through demo on training developed for this. And as soon as our tech-ready labs are finished and they go through the sign-off process, I will make these hands-on labs available for the external community as well. So that will be on the blog. And there was a question from Tim here. Can you explain the process of remote deployment of Windows 10 Enterprise? I'm not quite sure what that question is about. I'd be happy to be available, I think, after this call and talk about this a little more. I think getting into Windows 10 deployment strategies here is probably going to be a little bit above the scope of this compatibility call. But
that's correct, Mark. We can take that offline and have more information about remote deployment of Windows 10 potentially in a future call or other information.
Okay, great. So
excellent. Well, I'd like to, Mark, we really appreciate it, as well as Chris. You guys did an amazing job. I think the partners with the questions that we were getting really like this and are very excited about this. I know I am. I think offering this as a free service is unprecedented to our system integrators. I mean, the amount of information that we're getting is going to help our customers. It's going to help our partners. And we really love to say thanks for all the partners who attended today. Again, just as a reminder, stay on. We have those polling questions about what we'd like to see in the future on these calls. We'd love to get this continued level of detail for you. That's our main mission. And don't forget, if you have any questions whatsoever, to go to winrecruit@microsoft.com to ask us the questions. And Mark, did you want to go back one slide with the information for the blog? Again, I highly recommend, thank you, sir. I highly recommend go check out the blog at http://aka.ms/upgrade analytics and email uasupport@microsoft.com with any of that. If also reach out to Steve, Chet, myself. We're here for your enablement efforts. And there is one thing I wanted to add to. There is a telemetry white paper, and we can provide the links in our Yammer group. Again, I recommend everybody go sign up for the Windows Devices Yammer group. If you don't know how to do that, send us a quick email at winrecruit@microsoft.com, and we'll provide that information. But I'd like to go ahead and hand this back to Stephanie and say, again, have happy holidays, everybody. Be safe. I hope everybody enjoys the time with their family and their friends. This has been an amazing community call, and we truly appreciate all of your business working with us as partners from Microsoft. We wish you a happy holiday season. And Stephanie, feel free to close it out.
All right, great. So that first poll, it has been shown for a while now, so please, if you haven't already given us your feedback, go ahead and do that. We also have one more question, and that question is, what other topics and or presenters would you like to have in future web conferences? So please take a moment to think about that. Give us your feedback prior to logging out. Just as a reminder, if you'd like to catch the on-demand recording of this session, you can do so by using the same link that you used to join the live session today. You should also be receiving a follow-up email in approximately 3 days with that link as well. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining. I show that we don't have any further questions. So this will conclude today's call, and you may now disconnect.